What's last year been like?
Interesting. I was the chair of the board of the bank until late May and officially resigned on June the 5th, which was actually my birthday, so it was a joy to sign off on the job on my birthday. And for me personally, there have been several months when it has been hellish. And because I knew that I particularly needed to find some professional support for the issues that I was facing, I actually booked myself into a very well-known hospital for 4 weeks from the end of November until Christmas Eve, and underwent what was called their addictions treatment program for the 28 days that I was there. I found that both cathartic and traumatic, but it actually helped me to look at not so much the superficial issues of the addictions themselves, but the more deep-seated reasons why people resort to any sort of addiction. And for me that was, I think, life-changing. And I continue to go there every week for therapy.
Can we go back then to the question of the chairmanship of the bank?
Yep.
What was it that made you think you were qualified to run a bank?
I didn't, and it wasn't my job to make a judgment about whether I was qualified. Others made a judgment that I was the right and appropriate person to be the chair at that particular time. There was a panel which interviewed 4 of us who were candidates for the job. I was the unanimous choice of that panel. I was then the unanimous choice of the bank board. I was then the unanimous choice of the group board. And I then went again to the FSA for a further interview to see whether they thought I was fit to be chair of that bank board. I was prepared for this by a very hellish mock interview. A bit like you at your worst, really, if I might be so bold. And they took me to hell and back in terms of questions. But the FSA had a really wonderful conversation about philosophy and ethics and issues that were around, and their panel approved me. So it's not for me to make a judgment about whether I was qualified. A range of other people at the time said I was.
But you weren't a banker?
No, but I wasn't put in as a banker. I was put in as a co-operator, a representative of the co-op group, and I had a particular job to do in terms of governance. That was my role.
Did you know the extent of the problem after the merger with the Britannia Building Society?
Nobody did, and forgive me. Hindsight is a wonderful science, if I can be so bold. We took over the Britannia effectively in 2008. There was a merger, but effectively it was a takeover. And I inherited that when I became the chair in 2010. At the time of the takeover of Britannia, I recall, and I still have the documents at home, there were 3 separate pieces of due diligence done by accountancy firms, including our own accountants, KPMG, and by some fancy merchant bankers who were paid vast sums of money to do it. All of them said that this was a good deal. All of them pointed up that there were issues with the corporate lending book, but that lending book could be addressed by what were called fair value adjustments in the accounts. And that's precisely what we did, and we did it in thorough consultation with the FSA at the time. The FSA didn't pick up that there were these major problems, and certainly nobody in the city told us that they were.
What about the Lloyd's proposal?
Yep.
How much pressure did you come under on that?
Considerable from the present government, mainly from Conservatives. They wanted a deal. Remember that the government still is, the major shareholder of that bank. because of the structural support that it had needed back in 28. Clearly they wanted a deal which would help them in terms of public finances. They actually said that they were keen on this co-op becoming a much more significant player with more scale. We would have had about 7 or 8% of the market if this had gone through. And there was pressure certainly from Mark Hoban, but I believe and know that that originated much higher up with the Chancellor himself.
What form did this pressure take?
Regular calls, regular checks to see whether or not we were progressing well. And I mean 2 or 3 times a week calls from the junior minister. They wanted a deal, and they wanted us to do it. They might say no now, but I know that that was what they wanted, and that was the pressure they were applying.
You're painting yourself as an innocent abroad.
No, I'm certainly not innocent. I take full responsibility for decisions that we took, and indeed I resigned because I believe it was right for the chair of the board to take responsibility, albeit that all the decisions taken were not by me personally, but by the boards as a whole.
But resignation was an admission of inadequacy, wasn't it?
No, I think it's an admission that things had gone wrong, and that as the person who was in the chair, I should take responsibility for it.
How is it then that if you were cognizant of what was going on and you weren't an innocent abroad, how could you possibly appear before the Treasury Select Committee and get the assets of the bank out by a margin of over £40 billion?
I know, ill-prepared and not ready for all the questions, and in particular put off a tad by the aggression of some of the members of that committee and the clear attempts that some of them were making not to ask sensible or rational questions, but to try and trip me up, and in particular to engage in political point scoring.
But even so, to say the assets of the bank were what you said,
I-
£3 billion, and they were actually £47 billion?
Forgive me, I was wrong. I was badly wrong.
Do you think that something has happened in the world of banking which has made it a different sort of business to the sort of business? I mean, you did once do a banking exam years and years and years ago.
40 plus years.
40 years ago. But banking was a different kind of beast in those days, wasn't it?
I think it was a good profession. I think it was largely led by people of honour and decency.
Is it no longer?
There are people within it who are honourable and decent. Sadly, there are also a number of others who are not, and who I think are there for a whole range of reasons, some of which are to do with their own avarice and their own greed. And that's very sad. But we see the results of that every day. There's another story today about bonus payments in one particular bank. The whole thing is obscene.